Can you stand by the bathroom wall so you don't ruin the wedding photos with your age? That's what my new daughter-in-law said to me on the happiest day of my son's life, or at least it was supposed to be. I stood there holding the wedding gift I'd spent months saving for, trying to smile like it didn't hurt. My son didn't say a word. He didn't even look at me. So I picked up that box, turned around, and walked right out of that hall. They thought I was just being dramatic. They had no idea that the gift I took back would change everything: their marriage, their money, and the way they'd see me forever. What happened next still wakes me up at night. If you're watching this, make sure to subscribe and stay till the end, because trust me, you won't believe what was inside that box. My name is Evelyn Carter. I'm 65 years old, retired, and I've spent most of my life working as a school librarian in a small town called Ashbrook Bay. I've been a widow for 12 years. My husband Arthur passed away from a heart attack when our son Michael was in college. Since then, it's just been me, living quietly, saving what little I could from my pension, and trying to stay useful in people's lives. I never thought that the hardest day of my life would happen at my own son's wedding. That night, the reception hall was filled with light and music, the kind of place I'd never imagined being part of. People were dressed beautifully, laughing, taking pictures, drinking champagne. I stood near the back, holding the small wooden box I'd brought as a wedding gift. I had spent months saving for it. My dress was simple but clean, navy blue with a little shimmer. It wasn't expensive, but it was the nicest thing I owned. I wanted to look like I belonged there, even though deep down I already knew I didn't. I remember how Sierra, my new daughter-in-law, looked. Young, confident, everything polished from her hair to her voice. She was fixing her veil when her eyes found me standing by myself. She smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile that made you feel welcome. It was the kind that said, "You don't fit here." Then she walked over with her photographer right behind her. I thought maybe she wanted to take a picture with me. I even lifted the box a little, thinking she might want to include the gift. But instead, she stopped in front of me and said, "Mrs. Carter, would you mind standing by the bathroom wall? The lighting's more forgiving for older skin. We're trying to keep the pictures looking fresh for social media." It took me a second to realize what she was saying. The music didn't stop, but everything around me went quiet. I looked at her, then at the people standing nearby. A few turned their heads away, pretending they didn't hear. My son was talking to someone across the room, laughing, completely unaware of what had just happened. I waited for him to notice, to maybe step in, but he didn't even look in my direction. My throat tightened and I felt heat behind my eyes. I had helped pay for this wedding. I had spent months worrying about every little thing: flowers, food, photography bills, all to make it perfect for them. And in return, I was being asked to stand by the bathroom wall because my face didn't fit their version of beauty. I could have said something. I could have made a scene. But instead I smiled. It was small and tired, the kind of smile you wear when you've stopped expecting people to see you. I said, "Of course, whatever you need." And she seemed relieved. "Thank you so much," she said brightly, and then she turned away. I stood there for another few seconds, surrounded by laughter, glasses clinking, and music that suddenly felt too loud. Then I picked up the wooden box from the gift table, held it tight against my chest, and started walking toward the exit. My shoes made a soft sound on the floor, and I could feel people glancing at me but not saying anything. No one stopped me. No one asked if I was okay. As I reached the door, I looked back one last time. My son was standing under the lights with Sierra, smiling for photos, her hand on his chest, his arm around her waist. He looked proud, happy, and so far away from me that it almost felt like we were strangers. I pushed open the heavy doors and stepped outside. The air was cool, and the sound of music from inside faded as the doors closed behind me. I stood there for a moment, just breathing. The parking lot was almost empty. I could still see the glow of the lights from the windows, and I thought about how many times I had told myself that family always comes first, that love would come back if I just kept giving. But standing there in the dark, I realized that maybe I had been wrong. A taxi pulled up to the curb. The driver leaned out and asked, "Everything all right, ma'am?" I said, "Yes, I just needed some air." Then I got in, placing the wooden box carefully on my lap. That box wasn't just a gift. It was everything I had planned to give them, everything I had left. I looked down at it and thought about how they would never know what was inside, at least not yet. As we pulled away, I glanced back through the window. The wedding hall was getting smaller and smaller, the music faint, the laughter fading. I whispered to myself, they thought they were moving me out of a picture. They didn't know they were moving me out of their lives. And that was the night everything changed. Most mornings, I make tea and sit by the window. I look at the faded wedding photo of me and Arthur. We used to work at the same high school. He taught history, I ran the library. We met among the smell of old books and chalk dust. He used to say I was the calm in every storm. I never told him that without him, I felt like one long storm since. Sometimes I still whisper to myself, for 30 years, I taught kids to write stories of courage. I never thought I'd have to live one. I think about those kids and how easily I used to tell them that being kind was the same as being strong. Now, I'm not so sure. Michael, my son, visits sometimes. He's 36 now, smart, confident, always rushing. When he talks, it's about business, investors, numbers I can't follow. He speaks like every minute costs money. I nod and pretend to understand, even when I don't. He looks at his watch a lot. When he hugs me goodbye, he already feels halfway gone. Sierra, his wife, doesn't visit. The last time she came, she looked around my apartment and said, "Older homes smell like old people." Then she smiled like it was a joke. I smiled too, because that's what you do when you don't want to start an argument you'll lose. After she left, I washed the cups we never used and opened a window, not because it smelled, but because I needed air. I've learned to live with being alone. What I can't get used to is being invisible. People say aging is peaceful, but they don't tell you about the silence that comes when your voice stops mattering. I used to think I was a part of Michael's life. Lately, I feel more like an obligation he checks off between meetings. He always says, "We'll come by soon, Mom." And I say, "Take your time, sweetheart." But when the door closes, it's too quiet again. Sometimes I think about calling him, but I stop myself. I don't want to sound needy. I don't want to be that mother. So instead, I make 2 cups of tea, one for me and one that goes cold on the other side of the table. It's silly, but it makes me feel like someone might still come home. I don't blame Michael for having a life. I wanted that for him. But I wish he remembered that I still have one too. Every time he visits, I notice the way his eyes move around my place, at the old furniture, the yellow walls, the cracked lamp. I know what he's thinking: downsizing, safety, future care. I can almost hear Sierra's voice behind it, planning things I'm not part of. It's strange how you can give everything to someone and still feel like you never gave enough. I spent decades working late, stretching every dollar so he could have what I didn't. When he got his first big job, he bought a new car before he even called to tell me the news. I cried that night, not because he forgot, but because I realized he didn't think it mattered. I try not to hold on to those things, but they pile up. Every forgotten birthday call, every visit that ends too soon, every polite smile that says I'm busy. It doesn't break you all at once. It's slower than that. It wears you down until you stop expecting much. Still, I kept hoping. When he told me he was getting married, I thought maybe this would bring us closer again. I wanted to believe that family has a way of circling back. I helped where I could, with money, with planning, with every little thing they asked for. I said yes, even when I couldn't afford to. I told myself that love comes back if you give enough of it away. I was wrong. That day at the wedding, when Sierra told me to stand by the bathroom wall, it wasn't just about a photograph. It was about everything that had built up over the years. Every time I'd been quiet when I should have spoken. Every time I'd let them treat me like I was small because I was afraid of losing them completely. In that moment, something inside me just stopped bending. I didn't walk out because I was angry. I walked out because I finally understood that love without respect isn't love at all. When I got home that night, I made a cup of tea, sat at my kitchen table, and looked at that wooden box I'd taken back from the gift table. It sat there like a question. For years, I'd lived for my son's happiness. Now, I was starting to wonder what it would feel like to live for mine, and that's where the next part of this story begins. It was a Thursday afternoon, gray and a little cold, when I decided to bring a small basket of muffins to my neighbor, Mrs. Whitmore. She's 78, a widow like me. We've lived on the same floor for almost 10 years. Most days we exchange a few words in the hallway or talk about the weather. She's one of those people who always looks a bit fragile but still insists on watering her own plants and carrying her groceries upstairs. When I knocked, the door opened halfway. She looked startled, almost guilty, like I caught her doing something she shouldn't. Behind her, boxes were stacked everywhere. Old photos, blankets, kitchen dishes. The curtains were half pulled down, and her living room looked like a place that had already said goodbye. "Oh, Evelyn," she said, pressing a hand to her chest. "You scared me for a second." "I brought you some muffins," I said, holding up the basket. "Blueberry, still warm?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. That's kind of you, dear, but I can't stay long. I'm packing. Packing? Are you going somewhere? Her mouth twitched. They're selling the house, she said quietly. My son said it's for my good. A smaller place, easier to manage. I looked at her, trying to understand. But this is your home. You've been here for decades. She nodded, then sat down on one of the boxes and sighed. He made me sign some papers last week. Said it was just a few formalities. I didn't read them. I trusted him. Something in my chest tightened. You think? She looked at me with eyes that were clear but tired. Oh, I don't think, dear. I know. Once they smell inheritance, kindness dies first. The way she said it was almost gentle, but it landed like a weight. She gave a small, bitter laugh that turned into a cough. You'd be surprised how quickly love becomes business when money's involved. I sat beside her, the smell of cardboard and old perfume filling the air. Maybe he's just trying to help. Maybe it's not what you think. She looked at me the way a teacher looks at a student who hasn't learned the lesson yet. You're a sweet woman, Evelyn. I used to say those same words to myself. But you'll see. We mothers always hope we raised better than what life gives us back. I didn't know what to say. I reached for her hand instead. Her skin was thin and cool, but she squeezed mine firmly. Don't sign anything you don't understand, I said softly. She smiled, shaking her head. Too late for that. But it's all right. Maybe it's what's supposed to happen. Maybe it's just my turn to learn the truth. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The hallway light flickered. Somewhere outside, a car alarm went off and then stopped. Mrs. Whitmore's breathing sounded shallow, but her eyes stayed sharp, focused on me. You're a good neighbor, Evelyn, she said after a pause. Keep that heart of yours safe. People like us, we think love protects us, but love can also blind us. I didn't know what she meant, not fully. I nodded anyway, because it felt like something I should remember. When I left her apartment, she was still sitting on that box, staring at the wall where a family photo had hung for years. I walked back to my place, carrying the empty muffin basket in a strange heaviness that I couldn't name. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about her voice, calm but cracked, like someone who had made peace with being betrayed. I thought about my own son, about Sierra's bright smile, and about how easily we sign things in life without reading the fine print. Not papers, but promises. The next morning, I knocked on her door again, but no one answered. The boxes were still there, but she wasn't. Later, the landlord said her son had moved her out early, that the apartment would be repainted before it was listed. Just like that, she was gone. I stood in the empty hallway, looking at the marks her furniture had left on the floor, and felt something shift inside me. For years, I'd believed trust was a kind of love, that to trust was to give someone the benefit of the doubt. But that day, I started to wonder if maybe trust was something that needed protection too. When I walked back into my apartment, I noticed the wooden wedding gift box still sitting on my table. I brushed a bit of dust off the top. For a moment, I thought about what Mrs. Whitmore had said. Once they smell inheritance, kindness dies first. I made tea and sat down, staring at that box. I didn't know it yet, but her words were going to follow me into every decision, every phone call, every silence that came after. Because while she was packing up her house, I was starting to pack away something else. The last pieces of my own trust. It was late afternoon when the call came. I was folding laundry, half watching the news, when the phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Normally, I don't answer those, but that day, for some reason, I did. Mrs. Carter, the woman's voice said, "This is Angela from Hanover Mutual. I'm calling about your late husband, Arthur Carter." For a second, I thought she had the wrong number. It had been 12 years since Arthur passed away. I held the phone tighter. "Yes," I said. "That's me." She continued in the kind of calm tone people use when they know they're about to change your life. "Ma'am, after years of litigation, the court has ruled in favor of your late husband's claim. The settlement amount is $39 million. You're listed as the sole beneficiary." I didn't speak. The words hung in the air like they were in another language. $39 million. It didn't even sound real. "Mrs. Carter," she repeated. "Are you still there?" Yes, I'm here," I whispered. The rest of the call passed in a blur. Paperwork, bank accounts, signatures, all things that sounded like they belonged to someone else's story. When I hung up, the apartment felt silent in a new way. I sat down at the kitchen table and stared at my hands. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Then it hit me. The years of scraping by, the quiet humiliation, the careful counting of every dollar, all of it crashing against those two words. 39 million. And then I cried. Not softly, but hard, messy, shaking cries that came from somewhere deep. I cried for the years I'd worked too hard for too little. For the birthdays spent alone. For the woman who had forgotten what it felt like to be seen as more than an obligation. I cried until my chest ached. When I finally stood up, I walked to the small cabinet in the corner, Arthur's old drawer. It still smelled faintly like his cologne, even after all these years. Inside were a few old letters, a pair of cufflinks, and a yellow envelope I'd never opened. His handwriting on the front stopped me cold. If this ever reaches you, use it to buy peace, not approval. I sat down, hands trembling, and opened it. Inside was a short note written in his uneven, familiar script. Evelyn, if life ever finds a way to give you something big again, promise me you won't spend it trying to be enough for anyone else. You already were. Buy peace, not approval. I love you always. I read it 3 times before I could even see the words clearly. The ink had faded in places, but the meaning was sharp and alive. It felt like he was in the room again, calm, patient, reminding me of everything I used to believe before I let guilt and love twist themselves into something heavier. But old habits are hard to break. As I sat there, the first thought that came to my mind wasn't peace. It was Michael and Sierra. Maybe this was my chance to fix everything. Maybe if I helped them, they'd finally see that I wasn't a burden, that I could still be useful, that I could give instead of take. I imagined their faces if I handed them a check, or the look on Sierra's face when she realized I had something worth respect. I thought about paying off their house, buying them something beautiful, something that would change their lives. It was the kind of dream I'd carried for years, the dream of being wanted again. I made myself a cup of tea, though my hands were shaking too much to hold it steady. The cup rattled against the saucer as I sat back down. I read Arthur's words again and again, whispering them under my breath. Buy peace, not approval. But what if peace came from making things right? What if giving was the only way to feel whole again? I stared at the wedding photo on the wall, the one with the faded edges and the smile I hadn't worn in a long time. Arthur had always believed people learn through love. I still wanted to believe that too. I picked up the phone and looked at Michael's contact name. I didn't call him yet. I just held the phone and imagined the conversation. He'd sound surprised, maybe even proud for once. Sierra would soften. They'd look at me differently. Maybe they'd finally see me. I wanted to believe that money could heal the distance that years hadn't, that this miracle was a second chance, not just at life, but at love. But in the quiet of that room, with Arthur's letter still open in front of me, I felt something else, a warning I didn't want to hear. Mrs. Whitmore's voice echoed in my head, soft but sharp. Once they smell inheritance, kindness dies first. I looked around my small apartment, the same faded curtains, the same chipped mug, the same worn table, and realized how fragile goodness can be when it's built on hope instead of truth. Still, I told myself, they're not like that. Not my son, not my family. I wanted so badly to believe it that I convinced myself it must be true. That night, before I went to bed, I placed Arthur's letter inside the same wooden box that once held my wedding gift. It felt right, like a promise I intended to keep, even if I didn't yet understand how. Because when kindness still believes, it hasn't yet learned how to protect itself, and I was still learning. The day I went to see the house at Seawind Bluff, the wind was stronger than usual, the kind of wind that lifts your hair and makes you feel smaller than the sky itself. I had never been to that side of town before. It was where the roads curved along the cliffs, where the ocean met the land with a sound that never stopped. The real estate agent, a tall woman named Helen, was already waiting by the white gate. Her smile was polite but distant, the way people smile when they assume you're there by mistake. I didn't blame her. My coat was old, and my shoes had seen better days. "Are you sure this is the right property, Mrs. Carter?" she asked as we walked up the stone path. "Yes," I said. "Seawind Bluff." The house stood high above the water, painted white with blue shutters. The windows caught the light in a way that made it look alive. Every few seconds, the sound of waves crashing below filled the silence between us. Inside, everything smelled new. Paint, wood polish, and possibility. Helen's heels clicked across the floor as she gave her practiced speech. It's listed at 3.2 million, she said. Cash offers have priority, of course. It's a highly desirable property. I ran my fingers along the smooth surface of the kitchen counter. 3.2 million, I repeated quietly, then I smiled. So was the price of my silence all these years. She looked confused for a second, then forced another polite smile. I didn't explain. Some truths don't need an audience. We walked through the house together, 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, and a deck that opened straight to the ocean view. The air inside hummed with light. I could imagine Michael and Sierra standing here, laughing, building a life I never had. I imagined family dinners, children's voices, holidays, all the things that seemed to happen for other people. I wanted this place to change something, to prove that I was still capable of giving joy. When we reached the back deck, the view took my breath away. The cliffs dropped sharply below, the sea foaming against the rocks. The wind tangled through my hair, lifting it like a flag. For a long moment, I just stood there, letting it all wash over me. "I'll take it," I said finally. Helen blinked. "Don't you want to see the rest of the property? Maybe consider the inspection, or—" "No need. I'll take it," I repeated, saying cash. The pen felt heavy in my hand as I signed the papers. It wasn't just a house. It was years of unspoken words, of love I hadn't known how to give, of forgiveness I hadn't been asked for. It was everything I wanted to say to my son without ever saying it out loud. When the last page was signed, Helen shook my hand, still a little stunned. "Congratulations, Mrs. Carter," she said. "This must be exciting." "It is," I said softly. "Just not for me." On the drive home, the sun was setting behind me, the sky turning gold over the water. I thought about Arthur's letter. Buy peace, not approval. I wanted to believe I was doing both, that by giving them this house, I could bring peace to all of us. Back home, the apartment felt smaller than ever. The air was still, the clock ticking louder than usual. I opened the drawer where I kept Arthur's note and placed it beside the new documents, the house deed and a cashier's check for $3 million. I took out the wooden box, the same one I had once used for my wedding gift. It was smooth from years of being handled, the hinges a little loose. I wiped the dust off, lined it with tissue paper, and began placing everything inside. The deed to Seawind Bluff. The $3 million check, freshly printed, crisp as new hope. A letter I wrote in my neatest handwriting. For Michael and Sierra, with love. I sat back and looked at it. That small, ordinary box that now held more than money. It held the weight of everything I still believed about family. As I sealed the lid, the last light of day streamed through the window. Dust floated in the air, catching the sunset, turning gold before it disappeared. For a moment, the whole room looked like it was glowing. I ran my fingers over the box again and whispered, "This is how they'll know I love them." I imagined the moment they'd open it, the shock, the gratitude, maybe even tears. Maybe Sierra would realize she'd been wrong about me. Maybe Michael would look at me and see not an old woman, but his mother, someone who still had something to give. That thought made me smile, though it hurt a little too, because deep down, I knew love that has to prove itself is already wounded. Still, I tied a silver ribbon around the box and placed it on the table. The wood caught the last bit of sunlight before it faded completely. There are gifts meant to celebrate love, and there are gifts meant to test it. Mine, I realized, was both. The wedding was at Bay Ridge Hall. It was a big place. Bright lights, white flowers, music so loud you could feel it in your chest. Everyone looked like they belonged in a magazine. I remember standing by the door holding my wooden box. I'd spent weeks wrapping it just right. I thought maybe today everything would finally feel okay again. That maybe Michael would look at me and remember I was still his mother. When I walked in, I could tell right away that I didn't fit. People glanced at me and then looked away. No one was rude, but no one really saw me either. I smiled, said hello to a few people I recognized from his childhood, but they were polite in that way people are when they don't plan to talk for long. My table was way in the back, near the kitchen doors. I didn't mind. I told myself I'd rather watch from a distance anyway. When Michael and Sierra came in, everyone stood up and clapped. She looked beautiful, like she'd stepped out of a catalog. He looked proud, happy. I wanted to wave, but he didn't look my way. He was already talking to someone else. Dinner went by fast. People laughed, took photos, raised glasses. I kept glancing at the gift table where my box sat with all the others. I told myself that soon, when they opened it, everything would make sense. That this gift would change how they saw me. After dinner, the photographer started gathering people for pictures. That's when Sierra walked over to my table. She still had that perfect smile on her face, the kind you practice. "Mrs. Carter," she said softly, "would you mind standing by the bathroom wall for the photos? The lighting there is more flattering for, older skin. We just want the pictures to look young and bright for social media." At first, I thought I misheard her. Then I saw the looks on people's faces around me. Everyone went quiet. I could even hear the music stop for a second. I just stood there, holding my napkin. I wanted to believe she didn't mean it like that, but the way she smiled told me she did. It wasn't cruel. It was worse than that. It was casual. Like she really thought it was reasonable. Michael didn't notice. He was still talking, laughing, completely unaware that his wife had just told me I was too old to be in their wedding photos. I could have said nothing. I could have smiled and done what she asked. That's what I'd done my whole life. Stay quiet, stay kind, let people believe I didn't feel anything. But something in me just stopped. I looked at her and said quietly, "Some walls are meant to hide shame, not people." She froze. So did everyone else. For a few seconds, you could have heard a pin drop. Then someone cleared their throat, pretending it hadn't happened. I stood up, walked to the gift table, picked up my wooden box, and held it tight. Then I turned and walked straight out. No one stopped me. No one followed. The air outside was cool. I remember that more than anything. How good it felt to breathe again. The music was still playing inside, muffled through the walls. Tommy Reed, the taxi driver who'd brought me there earlier, was standing by his car. He looked surprised to see me so soon. "Bad night, ma'am?" he asked gently. I smiled, but not the fake kind. "No," I said, "what, just a picture I didn't belong in." He opened the door and I got in. The ride home was quiet. The city lights went by fast. My hand stayed on the box the whole time. When we reached my building, Tommy asked if I was sure I didn't want to go back. I told him, "No, I'm right where I need to be." Upstairs, I set the box on my kitchen table. The apartment felt smaller than ever, but also calmer. I looked at that box, the one that held the deed, the check, and my letter, and I realized I wasn't sad anymore. I wasn't even angry, just done. They thought they were moving me out of the picture. They didn't know I was about to draw a new one. That night, I made a cup of tea, sat by the window, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel sorry for myself. I felt free. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, still in my dress, my shoes kicked off by the door. The apartment was quiet except for the ticking clock on the wall. It was almost peaceful if it hadn't hurt so much. The wooden box was still on the table. I kept my hand on it, tracing the edge, feeling the weight of it. I thought about the wedding, about the look on Sierra's face, about how my own son didn't see me walk away. Around 3 a.m, the phone rang. The sound cut through the silence like a sharp bell. For a second, I thought about not answering. But then I picked it up. "Mom?" It was Michael. His voice was tired, uncertain. "Mom, you left early. Are you okay?" I looked at the box, still closed. My throat felt dry. "I'm finally okay," I said. He didn't know what to say. I could hear voices in the background. Laughter, maybe the tail end of the wedding party. "You missed the cake cutting, Mom. Everyone was wondering." "I'm sure they'll manage without me," I said quietly. "Mom, Sierra feels terrible," he added quickly, as if that made it better. "She said something came out wrong about the lighting. You know how she gets nervous about photos." I closed my eyes. The words were the same ones I'd heard all my life. Excuses dressed up as kindness. "Go to bed, Michael," I said. "Enjoy your honeymoon." Before he could answer, I hung up. It was quiet again for maybe 20 minutes before the phone rang a second time. Sierra, her voice was soft, careful, the way people talk when they want to sound gentle but are really trying to fix something for their own comfort. "Martha," she started, "I'm so sorry if I said something wrong tonight. The photographer was—" "You meant every word, Sierra," I said. There was silence on the other end. I could almost hear her trying to come up with another version of the story. "I was just thinking about the lighting. It had nothing to do with your age." "It had everything to do with it," I said, my voice steady. "Don't call me tonight. You'll understand soon enough." And I hung up again. After that, I turned the phone face down. I didn't want to hear it ring anymore. The clock ticked on, steady, slow, like it was counting down to something. I sat there in the half-light until morning, the wooden box still in front of me, the box that had been meant for them, with the deed, the check, And the letter, the gift that would have changed their lives. I looked at it and felt something shift inside me. They didn't deserve it. Not like this. Not with the way they saw me. So I stood up, opened my closet, and pulled out the small safe I kept under a blanket. I unlocked it, placed the wooden box inside, and closed it carefully. Then I locked the safe again and slid it back into the dark corner. It was strange. The moment I did that, I finally felt calm. Like I'd taken something back I didn't even realize I'd given away. In the morning, I made coffee and started planning. I wasn't angry, I was just clear. They were expecting me at their house the next day for the gift opening. I'd already said yes to Michael on the phone. I wasn't going to cancel, but they weren't going to see what they thought they would. I took another small wooden box from the shelf, one that used to hold my jewelry. Inside, I placed a single apartment key and a folded note. The key was to my new apartment, the smaller place I'd bought in town, not the beach house. The note just said, "Come visit sometime." It looked like a gift. It wasn't. It was bait, a way to let them think they still understood me. I sat back in my chair holding the small box and smiled for the first time in a long while, not because I was happy, but because I finally had control. For years, I'd answered every question with patience. I'd explained, justified, apologized. That night, I learned that sometimes the best answer doesn't come from words. Sometimes it comes from a plan, and mine was just beginning. The next day, their house was full of people, friends, family, co-workers, all laughing, drinking coffee, and watching Michael and Sierra open their wedding gifts. The place smelled like new candles and expensive food. Everyone looked rested and happy, like the night before had gone perfectly. I stood by the door for a moment holding my small box. I'd wrapped it the same way I did the real one. White paper, silver ribbon. You wouldn't know the difference unless you opened it. When Sierra saw me, she smiled wide and walked over, her heels clicking on the floor. "Martha, I'm so glad you came," she said, all bright and warm like nothing had happened. "I was just telling Michael how awful I felt about last night. You know, with all the chaos and lighting and—" I just nodded. "It's fine, dear." She kept talking, like she had to fill the silence. "You know how weddings are? Everyone's stressed, things get misunderstood." "Of course," I said. "Completely understandable." She looked relieved, as if I'd just erased what she'd done. The living room was crowded. Wrapping paper everywhere, champagne glasses half full, people laughing a little too loud. Sierra sat in the middle, perfectly dressed again, opening gift after gift while everyone oohed and awed over crystal, china, and designer kitchenware. When she got to my gift, the small box, Michael looked surprised. "Mom, you didn't have to get us another one," he said. "I wanted to," I said simply. He smiled, the polite kind he gives people at work. Sierra untied the ribbon carefully, probably expecting something sentimental or old-fashioned. She lifted the lid and her smile froze almost instantly. Inside was a single key and a folded piece of paper. She looked at it, confused, then at me. "What's this?" "It's the key to my new apartment," I said. "Unit 4A, Meridian Lofts. You should visit sometime." Michael reached over, took the paper, and read it. His eyebrows went up. "Mom, you moved?" "Yes," I said. "Just last week." The room got quiet. It wasn't the silence of respect. It was the kind of silence that happens when people don't know what to say but are thinking plenty. Sierra was still smiling, but her eyes were moving fast, calculating. "That's wonderful, Martha," she said finally, her tone just a little too sweet. "It must feel amazing to be in a new place." "It does," I said. "Peaceful." No one said anything for a while after that. People started talking again, but quieter. The laughter had thinned out. Even the music felt too loud for the room. I watched them open the rest of the presents, blenders, picture frames, monogrammed towels, all the things people think they need to start a new life. They thanked everyone, posed for pictures, and kept smiling for the crowd. But every now and then, I caught Sierra glancing at me. Her smile stayed fixed, but her eyes kept asking silent questions she couldn't bring herself to say out loud. How? When? Why didn't we know? Michael tried to act normal, but he was fidgeting. I could see the gears turning in his head, too. They weren't wondering if I was happy. They were wondering how much was left. I sat there with my hands folded in my lap, pretending not to notice. I smiled when people looked my way. I laughed when I was supposed to, but inside I was watching the air change, the warmth turning into something colder, sharper. That's the thing about family gatherings. The noise can cover a lot, but it can't hide the truth. You can feel it even when no one says a word. After a while, I stood up and said I had to go. Sierra insisted on walking me to the door, still smiling too brightly. "We'll come by soon," she said, her voice thin. "You know, to see your new place." "I'd like that," I said. "Just call first." Outside, the air felt cleaner. I walked down the steps and into the quiet street. The sun was setting, and the light hit the windows of their house. Perfect, warm, golden. From the outside, it looked like happiness. But I knew better. Back home, I unlocked the safe and checked the real wooden box. Still there, still sealed, still waiting. I ran my fingers along the lid and felt calm again. People think revenge has to be loud, shouting, breaking things, burning bridges. But sometimes it's just silence. Sometimes it's sitting in a crowded room, saying almost nothing, and knowing you're the only one who really understands what's happening. That night, I made myself tea and looked out the window at the dark street below. The phone didn't ring, but I knew it would soon. And when it did, I'd be ready. Some silences hurt more than words, but some silences mean you finally stopped begging to be heard. A week after the gift opening, I met Rebecca Chen at a small cafe near the harbor. It was quiet that morning, just the sound of rain on the windows and the low hum of people talking. I liked that place. No one looked twice at you, and the coffee was always strong. Rebecca was younger than I expected. Maybe late 30s, sharp eyes, calm voice. She worked as a private investigator, recommended by a woman from church who said Rebecca handled delicate family matters. I didn't tell her everything when I hired her, just that I wanted to know if anyone had been checking into me lately. She came in wearing a gray coat, her hair tied back. "Mrs. Carter," she said, sitting across from me. "Thank you for waiting." I nodded. "You found something?" She pulled a folder from her bag and slid it across the table. "They hired someone," she said. "A man named Jake Morrison. Used to be a police detective. They asked him to trace your assets." I didn't move the folder right away. I just stared at it, the brown edges curling slightly from the rain. "They?" I asked. "Your son and daughter-in-law," she said softly. I almost laughed, but it came out more like a sigh. "Did they find peace too?" Rebecca smiled faintly. "I doubt it." I opened the folder. Inside were pages of printouts, bank records, and notes. My name was highlighted in yellow in a few places. Rebecca pointed to one section. "They discovered the new apartment, the one at Meridian Lofts. They also found the car you bought and some furniture purchases, but they didn't find the beach house. That's still under the trust name you set up." "You did that right?" "Good," I said quietly. Rebecca flipped to another page. "There's more. Sierra's credit cards, maxed out. 3 of them. She also took out a personal loan last year and told the bank it was for medical expenses. But from what I could tell, she used it for designer items and travel." I looked at her, not surprised. She told everyone she was helping her mother pay hospital bills. Rebecca nodded. "She's good at pretending. But the debt's real, and she's been trying to consolidate it under Michael's name. He doesn't know yet, at least not fully." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The rain outside got heavier, running down the windows in slow streams. A man by the counter stirred his coffee, the spoon clinking in a steady rhythm. Rebecca leaned back. "I've seen this a lot. Families digging into each other's money like it's a game. Last year, I had a case with an old man, 83, retired teacher like you. His son convinced him to sign papers for investment purposes. Turned out it was the savings account he'd kept for his wife's care. The son took everything. The father's in a nursing home now, and the son lives in a lake house." I looked down at the papers again. My fingers trembled slightly. "He trusted him," I said. "They always do," Rebecca said quietly. "Love makes people forget to lock the door." I folded the folder closed and set it aside. "I spent most of my life teaching kids how to write stories about courage and kindness," I said. "Now I have to write my own, and it doesn't look much like what I taught." Rebecca gave me a long, thoughtful look. "Maybe it's not about kindness anymore, Mrs. Carter. Maybe now it's about boundaries." I smiled at that. Small, tired, but real. "Boundaries," I repeated. "I guess I'm still learning how to spell that." She laughed softly, then turned serious. "I can draw up a report you can keep for your records. It'll help if they ever try anything legal. Contesting your assets, claiming mental incapacity, that sort of thing. It happens more often than you'd believe. People do that to their parents? I asked. Even though I already knew the answer, she nodded. All the time. Outside, the rain kept falling. A mother and her little boy passed the window, sharing a small umbrella. The boy laughed as he jumped into a puddle. For a moment, I remembered Michael when he was that small. The way he used to hold my hand. How proud I'd been just to be his mom. I looked away before the memory could sting too much. Maybe peace needs lawyers, I said finally. Rebecca smiled a little. Sometimes it does, but sometimes it just needs someone who's not afraid to say enough. We sat there in silence for a while, just listening to the rain. Then she stood, left her card on the table, and walked out into the gray morning. I stayed behind for another cup of coffee. I didn't open the folder again. I didn't need to. I'd already seen what mattered. Proof that my instincts were right. Proof that trust, once cracked, doesn't heal on its own. When I got home, I placed the folder inside my safe, next to the wooden box. 2 different kinds of truth, both heavy in their own way. For the rest of the evening, I sat by the window, watching the rain roll down the glass. It used to be that I found comfort in storms. The sound, the rhythm, the reminder that everything passes. But that night, I realized something else. Peace isn't quiet. It's the sound of a door finally closing where it should have closed long ago. I used to teach others how to write stories. Now I'm learning how to write boundaries. It was early morning when the message came. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter while I was making tea. The text said, "Michael collapsed. Please come to St. Helena Hospital." For a second, my hands froze. My heart started beating too fast. Then something in me, that small, quiet part that had learned not to trust easily anymore, told me to stop. I sat down, picked up the phone, and called the hospital directly. The receptionist sounded polite, half asleep. "St. Helena Hospital, how may I help you?" "Yes," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I'm looking for a patient named Michael Carter. He was brought in this morning." There was a pause. I could hear typing. Then she said, "I'm sorry, ma'am. We have no one by that name here." I waited a moment before asking, "Are you sure? Maybe he's in the emergency department?" She checked again. No record of a Michael Carter admitted or treated today. When I hung up, I didn't feel panic. I felt something colder, the kind of stillness that comes when you finally see something for what it really is. I called Sierra. She answered on the second ring, her voice trembling in that practiced way I'd learned to recognize. "Martha, thank God you called. We've been so worried. Michael—" I cut her off. "Which hospital did you say again?" There was silence, then a stutter. "Oh, maybe I got it wrong. Everything happened so fast. We need to talk. We're family, Martha." "Family," I repeated quietly. "Family doesn't hide you behind bathroom walls." The line went silent. I could almost hear her breathing, caught between guilt and frustration. "Martha, please," she said finally. "You're misunderstanding. We just—" Click. I hung up. I set the phone down and sat there for a long time, staring at the steam rising from my untouched tea. It wasn't shock anymore. I think I'd passed that stage long ago. It was more like confirmation, the final piece of the proof that whatever tie we once had wasn't about love anymore. It was about control, about money, about fear. The hospital trap was a new low, but not a surprising one. They'd realized I wasn't going to hand anything over willingly, so they turned to lies. The kind of lie meant to pull on the one string they still thought I couldn't cut, a mother's worry. And for a brief moment, they almost succeeded. Because no matter how old your child gets, there's a part of you that never stops wanting to run when they fall. That part doesn't die easily. But that morning, I finally made it stop listening. I turned off my phone, unplugged the landline, and opened the curtains. Outside, the day was gray, the sea rough against the rocks below the bluff. I stood there watching the waves hit and pull back, like they couldn't decide if they wanted to stay or leave. That was me once. Always pulled back by guilt, by the thought that maybe I was being too harsh, too cold, too sensitive. That word again, the one people use when they want you to feel guilty for being hurt. Not anymore. The kettle clicked off behind me. I poured myself another cup of tea, steady hands this time. I thought about calling them back. About saying something final, something clever or sharp, the kind of line that makes sense in movies, but I didn't. Because silence is a sentence too. It says everything words can't fix. Later that day, I went to my desk and took out the folder Rebecca had given me, the one full of documents, debts, and names. I read through a few pages, then slipped it back into the safe next to the wooden box. Those two things together, truth and proof, were enough. They wanted a reaction. Instead, they got nothing, and that nothing was the first peace I'd felt in years. That night, I sat on the balcony of the beach house. The ocean sounded different now, not soft, but sure, a kind of steady that only comes when you stop needing people to understand your worth. I looked at my phone one last time before setting it face down on the table. I didn't need to block their numbers. I just needed to stop answering. When lies become the only way someone remembers you, silence is the only way you remember yourself. It was 9 a.m. when the phone rang. I almost didn't answer. By now, I knew what their calls sounded like. Soft at first, then urgent, then heavy with guilt. But something made me pick up. Mom? Michael's voice was tight, nervous. We know about Seawind Bluff. The investigator found the deed. I took a slow breath. The sea was calm outside my window, sunlight glinting off the water. Congratulations, I said. Detective work suits you. There was a pause. I could hear him breathing hard, maybe pacing. Mom, please, we just want to talk. You'd need an invitation for that, I said quietly, and people who hide me from cameras don't get invited. He didn't say anything for a while. I could almost picture him, sitting somewhere with his head in his hands, trying to figure out how to reach me. For once, I didn't feel sorry for him, just tired. Mom, he started again. We made mistakes. Sierra, she didn't mean to hurt you. It was all a misunderstanding. I looked at the wooden box sitting on my desk, the one I'd locked away for months now. It wasn't a misunderstanding, I said. It was a choice, and choices have prices. There was another pause. His voice softened. You're right, but we can fix this. Just talk to me, please. I hesitated for a second. Maybe he thought I'd hang up again, but instead I said, Michael, do you know what was inside the box I took from your wedding? He didn't answer. I went on, slow and steady. It wasn't crystal glasses. It was the deed to this house, and a check for $3 million, both made out to you and Sierra. Silence. The kind that stretches so long you can almost hear it breathing. Finally, his voice came out shaky. You were going to give us everything? I was, I said. I was going to keep just enough to live on. The rest was for you. I thought maybe it would help you start your life together. I thought it would remind you that your mother wasn't a burden. He didn't speak. I could hear him swallow hard, trying not to cry. For a moment, I almost softened. Almost. But you chose image over respect, I said quietly, and that told me everything I needed to know. He took a deep breath. Mom, I didn't know she said that to you. I swear I didn't. If I had... You didn't have to hear it, I interrupted. You saw me standing alone. You saw where they put me, and you didn't say a word. That silence on his end, it said more than any apology ever could. Mom, please, he whispered finally. I don't care about the money. I just want things to go back to how they were. How they were? I repeated. You mean the part where you forgot to call unless you needed help with rent or a loan? Or when you let your wife talk to me like I was a problem you had to manage? He didn't answer. I could hear him breathing. Again, slow and broken. I'm sorry, he said finally, the words so small they almost disappeared into the phone. I really am. I know you are, I said. But being sorry doesn't erase the truth. I gave you 36 years of my life. You had every chance to treat me with kindness. You just didn't think I'd ever stop giving. He sniffed, trying to steady his voice. Can I come see you, please? Just to talk. I looked out at the waves crashing against the rocks below the bluff. You'd have to be invited, Michael, I said. And right now, I don't think you'd like what I'd have to say. Mom, I closed my eyes. Do you remember what your father used to tell you when you were little? There was a long pause. To never take people for granted, he said softly. That's right, I whispered. Seems like you forgot. I could hear him trying to breathe through tears now. I love you, Mom. I love you too, I said. But love isn't the same as trust, and I think it's time you learned the difference. I waited a few seconds, then added, You'll be fine, Michael. You always land on your feet. But I'm done trying to be your safety net. From now on, you'll have to stand on your own. He didn't say anything. Maybe he knew there was nothing left to say. I hung up first. The house was quiet again, except for the steady hum of the ocean outside. I sat there for a long time, just listening. My heart didn't hurt the way it used to. It just felt settled, like a storm that had finally passed. For years, I thought being a good mother meant giving everything, even when it hurt. But that morning, I finally understood. Sometimes the only thing worth keeping is your dignity. They had spent months chasing money, and in the end, I was the one who found peace. When my son finally understood the value of money, I had already learned the value of self-respect. The funeral was small. Only a handful of people came, a few neighbors, a nurse from the care home, and me. Mrs. Whitmore had outlived almost everyone who once called her by her first name. The sky that morning was gray, the kind that feels heavy but calm. I stood by the edge of her grave holding a few white chrysanthemums. Someone from the church said a few words. It was polite, short, and forgettable. When it was over, people drifted away, already checking their phones, already thinking about lunch. I stayed. Her house sat across the street from the cemetery, the same one she'd lived in for 40 years. There was a for sale sign in front now, bright red against the dull lawn. The windows were covered with paper, the curtains gone. Everything she'd owned was already boxed and tagged for auction. I walked up the path, flowers still in my hand. On the porch was a stack of mail that no one had bothered to collect. I set the flowers down by the door and sat on the steps for a while, staring at the sign. She had told me once, not long before she was moved to the care home, that her son made her sign papers she didn't understand. It's for your good, Mom, he'd said, so we can manage things easier. Those papers turned out to be the deed to her house. She lost her home 3 months later. I reached into my bag and took out a copy of the document Rebecca had shown me, a photocopy of the loan agreement and the signature line. I'd asked for it after the funeral arrangements were made. Mrs. Whitmore's name was shaky, barely legible. I looked at it for a long time. Then I whispered, "You were right, Mrs. Whitmore. Kindness dies first, but I can make sure it's reborn." It wasn't just a promise, it was a decision. When I got home, I opened my desk drawer and took out a fresh folder. On the cover, I wrote in black ink, "The Whitmore Foundation." I started small, outlining what it would be, who it would help. A fund for elderly people taken advantage of by their families, people too scared or too proud to ask for help. People like her, people like me. It didn't feel like charity, it felt like repair. I spent the rest of that week meeting with Rebecca, with lawyers, with a woman from a senior advocacy group downtown. I wasn't naive. I knew it would take time. But I also knew I had the means and finally the purpose. For years, I thought the best way to love was to give without limits. Now I understood. Sometimes love means protecting others from the same pain you've survived. That night, I sat in my living room going through old papers, bills, receipts, letters. A photo of Michael and Sierra's wedding fell out of one of the envelopes. The two of them were smiling, frozen in a moment that had already passed long before the picture was taken. A soft wind from the open balcony door lifted the photo off the table. It slid across the wood, hovered for a second, and then fell into the small pool of water on the patio outside. I didn't move to save it. I just watched it float for a few seconds, then drift over the edge and disappear. There was no anger in me anymore. No sadness either. Just a strange kind of peace. The kind that comes when you finally stop trying to fix people who don't want to change. I walked to my desk, opened the safe, and looked at the two things that had defined this story. The wooden box and the folder of legal documents. One was about loss, the other about creation. I realized then that both were part of the same lesson. I didn't lose a son. I simply stopped funding his ingratitude. The ocean outside was quiet that night. The waves were soft against the rocks, like they were resting too. I sat by the window with my tea looking out at the horizon. The world felt wide again, not lonely, just open. For the first time in years, I didn't think about what I'd lost. I thought about what I'd built. I found it by accident. The old wooden chest had been sitting under my desk for years, the same one I used to keep the wedding gift in. I was cleaning out papers for the foundation when the corner of a yellowed envelope caught my eye. The handwriting stopped me cold. Arthur's. It was faded but still familiar. Steady, gentle, like the man himself. On the front it said, "To Evelyn, in case I can't say goodbye." For a long moment I just stared at it. My hands shook as I picked it up. The paper was brittle from time, soft at the edges. I sat down at the desk, took a breath, and opened it. Inside was a single page written in his neat handwriting, blue ink that had bled slightly with age. I could almost hear his voice as I read. My Evelyn, if this ever reaches you, it means I wasn't there to hold your hand when you needed me. I know how strong you are, but I also know you'll give pieces of yourself away, trying to keep peace for everyone else. Don't. If they forget who you are, remind them by walking away with everything they wanted from you. Walk away and keep your head high. You don't owe anyone the soft parts of yourself if they treat them like weaknesses. I want you to find peace, even if it's alone. You've carried everyone else long enough. It's your turn to rest now. Arthur. I didn't realize I was crying until one of the tears hit the paper. I wiped it gently with my sleeve, afraid to smudge the ink any further. His voice echoed in my head, calm, steady, loving. The same voice that used to read to me at night when we were still young and dreaming about the future. I took the letter and walked out onto the balcony. The air was cool, the ocean restless below Seawind Bluff. The sky was a soft gray and the wind carried the smell of salt and memory. I stood there holding his letter close and said quietly, I did, Arthur. I finally did. The waves below crashed against the rocks, steady and sure, like applause from the earth itself. For a long time I just stood there, feeling something I hadn't felt in years, peace that didn't depend on anyone else. Later that afternoon, I sat at my desk again. The letter was beside me, flattened gently under a glass paperweight. I took out my pen and opened the folder for my new will. It was simple, clean. No more complicated attachments or explanations. All of my assets, the beach house, the investments, the remaining funds, would go to the Whitmore Foundation and a new scholarship fund in Arthur's name, Teachers Who Stand Tall. For the first time, everything I'd built had a purpose that felt right. It wasn't about leaving money, it was about leaving meaning. When I finished signing the documents, I looked at Arthur's letter again. The edges were curled now, but his words still felt alive. I placed it back into the wooden chest, not as a goodbye, but as a reminder. The kind that doesn't fade. The sun had started to set. Light filled the room, soft and golden, brushing against the old photo frames on the wall. The one of me and Arthur, younger, hopeful, his arm around me, caught the last of the sun before it dimmed. I smiled. Love doesn't vanish when people leave. It doesn't fade when time moves on. It simply finds a place more deserving to stay. And after all this time, I finally found that place. It took me weeks to write the letter, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wanted to make sure I said it without anger. Anger was easy. Forgiveness took time. I sat at the small table on the balcony, the ocean stretching wide below. The sun was starting to set, painting the water with that warm, tired kind of light that feels like the end of something, but also the start of something new. I took a deep breath, picked up my pen, and started to write. Dear Michael, I don't hate you, my son. I never did. I only hope one day you'll understand that respect is also a kind of wealth. You were raised with love, but somewhere along the way, love turned into expectation. You started seeing care as a debt and kindness as something owed. I can't change that for you, but I can change what I accept. I wish you a life that teaches you what mine finally did. That peace isn't found in approval, but in boundaries. That being needed isn't the same as being loved. I will always be your mother, Michael, but I'm finally learning to be my own person too. Mom. I folded the paper carefully and slid it into a small glass bottle, the kind Arthur used to collect seashells in. I walked down the narrow path to the rocks below Seawind Bluff. The wind was soft, the sea restless. I stood there for a long moment, holding the bottle against my chest. It wasn't a letter for him, not really. It was for me. The part of me that still needed to let go. I uncorked the bottle, rolled the paper tight, and slipped it inside. Then I sealed it, walked to the edge, and threw it as far as I could. It hit the water with a quiet splash, then floated away, rocking gently with the tide until it was just a small dot against the endless blue. As I watched it drift, I felt something loosen inside me, something that had been heavy for far too long. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't even about pain. It was about release. Voiceover. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's getting everything that makes you whole again. The camera would have pulled back then, if this were a film. I could almost see it in my mind. Me standing there on the deck, the wind in my hair, the ocean wide and gold under the last light of day. The house behind me, quiet. The world ahead, open. For the first time, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel left out of anyone's picture. I felt free. The waves carried the letter farther out until it was gone from sight. I stood there until the light faded, then turned and went inside. The air smelled like salt and peace. I poured myself a cup of tea, sat by the window and smiled. There was no bitterness left in me, only gratitude that I had lived long enough to understand what love truly meant, not giving everything away, but keeping enough to stay whole. On my desk, beside Arthur's old letter, was a small note I'd written earlier that morning. Just 3 lines. Kindness, when guarded, becomes strength. Forgiveness, when chosen, becomes freedom. Dignity, once found, never leaves. I taped it to the edge of my mirror where I'd see it every morning. Outside, the tide shifted again, steady and patient, pulling the letter farther toward the horizon. Somewhere out there, maybe it would wash up on another shore. Maybe someone would find it and read it. Or maybe it would just drift forever. A quiet message from a woman who finally learned how to let go, and that was enough.